Program Director for Public Policy, Community Health, and Civic Engagement at the San Francisco Foundation. And I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule. We know that this is the end of the fiscal year for many of you, so it's a period where it's a very demanding time. So we appreciate you taking out time from your schedule to meet with us this morning. As you may know, this is the second convening of the San Francisco Foundation's 5-county cohort for disaster preparedness. And as all of you know, you're part of a larger cohort of 45 agencies that we support at the San Francisco Foundation with technical assistance for disaster planning and also the capacity to provide you with immediate disaster relief grants. We're excited to have you here today, and we're proud of the work that you do to prepare to serve your clients and communities after a disaster, on top of the already demanding roles you play day to day in providing the necessary services before and after a disaster occurs. It's often said that you don't want to be exchanging business cards for the first time after a disaster. And as you know, and we'll see today, relationships matter a lot. Our keynote speaker, Carlos Rodriguez, I had the great pleasure of having dinner with him last night. He has great experience, a real lived experience from Superstorm Sandy, in which his experience was really about having the relationships before the disaster occurs, and he will go into much more detail about that and be very eloquent about it. But we want to take the conversation about collaborations actually a step further today. And I know all of you have been working hard the past several years on disaster plans to recover operations, to serve clients and the community, and really to embed disaster planning into the DNA of your organizations, which is no small undertaking. And in doing so, I know you've all looked at collaboration to varying degrees. It's to find a place to relocate your organization if your own facility is damaged. It's identifying alternate sources of supplies or additional resources, increasing effectiveness of their programs and increasing efficiency, or offering more services to clients by collaborating. And today's session around collaboration, because it's often hard to find time to deal with this component, particularly with your busy schedules, it's not so easy. So that's why we made that the focus of our meeting today, to take time out and to really focus on the thing that often gets lost given the priority of things that you have to do, that we understand and believe is really a critical ingredient in responding to disasters. So we have a full agenda today of thought-provoking discussions and opportunities to explore how the ideas and the experiences of others, and in saying what I said about Carlos, I want to recognize many of you have experienced disasters. So we will also be looking to your work experience and your experience to inform others, and how all of this can be applied to your work and your organization. And the title of our event, Collaboration in Disaster, Promising Practice and Pitfalls, that's a mouthful, reflects our understanding that there are some really important lessons to learn about what supports collaboration and where are the challenges in which one size does not fit all in a collaboration. And I want to do a little caveat and a little confession. You probably have the sense, working with foundations, that it can often come across that foundations believe that collaboration is kind of the beginning and the end of effective community work. And we're a little more agnostic today about that, and we want to hear from you your experience as opposed to wanting to necessarily impose a version of our ideology that we think is very important, but it's only as important as it is to helping you succeed at your work. So we believe it's important, in particular in disasters, because it can fill gaps in resources, it can avoid duplications of services. As you'll hear, when you have this very sophisticated planning and you have your collaborations in place, and then the disaster hits, and often, as we know, all of that planning falls out of people's heads. And there's an immediate thing that you have to do, and there's egos, and there are many complicated things that make even the most carefully planned collaborations come under stress in a disaster. It can also be challenging because of many organizations have different objective and organizational values and approaches. They have very different cultures, even under the best of circumstances. When you try and do a collaboration, collaborations always run into the buzzsaw of culture, which is how do you integrate, how do you communicate, how does the DNA, can it be shared, do you have the same ethos of client service, who's going to do what, who has the resources. All of that really gets called into play in a disaster, and that's where this comes in. So we're going to tackle all of this today, and as we look at how collaborations have been established and what's helped them to succeed, and we also want to look at the stumbling blocks and how you can overcome them ahead of time. So looking forward to stimulating discussions and being with you today, and I want to hand the podium over to Andrea to talk about the details of today's agenda. Thank you.
A little shorter even with these heels. Good morning. I know most of you in the room, but for those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Andrea Zussman, the Disaster Preparedness Officer at the San Francisco Foundation, and work with Mark and Emily and Shally on our disaster preparedness program. It's great to have you all here today. I feel a little bit like the room might fall this direction, so I'm going to try to orient myself a little bit to all of you. I want to just, again, echo Mark's welcome. This is the second of what I hope is, a long-standing tradition of getting together once every year or year and a half or 2 years, just for all of those of you who are working on disaster planning in your organizations, to have a chance to meet together, share your thoughts about a particular idea or problem or concept or best practice, and continue to get to know each other better within your county, within your sector, and where all the opportunities are to collaborate. And so today's conversation, I think, was going to draw on the rich experience that you all have. Whether you've been through a disaster or not, you've all been struggling with the issues of what are we going to do when, and how are we going to do it best. So again, I welcome you here today. Before I review the agenda with you, a few housekeeping items. The restrooms are down the hall, just past the reception desk. In case of emergency, there are 2 emergency exits behind, down this hall here, just outside of this room. There's an emergency exit and one at the very end of the hall. So if you go past the reception desk and hang a right, the signs say, take the stairs to the 2nd floor and wait for instructions. And I've been told that that's in case we don't actually have to evacuate. And if we do, they will actually give instructions on where to go out the door. I've also been told that if you go through that door, you can't come back. So no one's slipping out for a phone call out the emergency exit, because you'll have to go all the way down and come all the way back up. There are 2 computers outside in the lobby for your use if you need it. I believe there's also a printer and wireless. TCE guest is the password. And for anyone who's got their phone around, if you can please make sure that it's on silent so that we can do our work uninterrupted. But if you have to take a call, there's plenty of space out in the lobby that's comfortable. So on to the agenda. You all should have a copy of the agenda, the 2-pager. It's full. I'll tell you that when we were finalizing this last week or 2, I realized it's too full. That's my habit, as those of you who have been to these before already know. I can't help myself. And so we're going to do the best we can to get through a very full set of discussions. And, if there's 5 discussion questions, and you get through 2, that's fine. But I do want to ask you to kind of be mindful of the time during breaks and moving from session to session, because, again, the schedule's pretty tight. So, as Mark said, we're going to begin with a conversation with Carlos Rodriguez from the FoodBank of Monmouth and Ocean Counties in New Jersey about his experience in Superstorm Sandy. That's going to be followed by a discussion at the tables that you're already at. Theoretically, you're sort of grouped by sector, and you have at least one facilitator. at each of your tables. It's going to help guide you through a conversation about, so what does Carlos's experience mean for you and mean in the Bay Area? So I encourage you to take some notes. There's no test, but we are going to actually focus very specifically on some of the issues that came up in New Jersey. So just a super quick show of hands. If people have things to write on, pens and paper, and yes, no? Quick show of hands. Who needs something to write on? Okay. We'll just give you some paper and something, because we're not going to ask specific questions about line by line what he had to say, but I want to just make sure that you have an opportunity to jot some things down. So we're going to talk about what does it mean for you and your organization and your sector. We're then going to take a short break, followed by 3 interactive sessions where we look at the experience here in the Bay Area. You all have tremendous experience. Some of you have very specific experience around collaboration that we want to highlight today. And we're also going to have an opportunity, to apply those organizations back to yourselves. So each opportunity is going to be, here's a set of experiences, what does it mean for you? Here's a set of experiences, what does it mean for you? Because I really want you to go back to your organization with something concrete and specific to move the discussion forward. So we're going to have 3 separate conversations, one about creating and implementing agreements. We often talk about that. What does it really mean to create an agreement? And then once the ink is dry on the signature line, what then? We're going to hear from folks from the crisis lines in the Bay Area, the 211 systems, and the food banks. We're also going to have a conversation about relationships, and when there are long-standing relationships, how do you leverage those for disaster planning? And we've got some terrific experience here in the room of some work in San Francisco and some other places where there's a struggle to kind of transform those organizational relationships and networks into something disaster related. So we're going to hear both sides of that coin. And then the last option is about organizations working across sectors, business, government, and the nonprofit sector, to create a vision and then realize the vision of a resilient neighborhood. And we're going to hear from folks working in the Bayview neighborhood of San Francisco about what that looks like. And what I encourage you to do is look at the descriptions and not focus so much on the sector or on the county where the experience is coming from, because what I've asked the speakers to do is really focus on the concept. Okay, so pick the concept that's going to be most important, and if there's more than one person from your organization here today, I'd encourage you to take advantage of more than one session. Then we're going to have lunch, which I hear is delicious, and during lunch we're going to have a little networking activity, low key, but I think really important. It's our collaborative marketplace, and as you'll see, we've got a big piece of butcher paper on the wall. It says offers, needs, and collaboration ideas. And what we encourage you to do, we've got a set of Post-its that are quite large and colorful, is to think about what you need. I mean, in conversations I've had around planning this conference, people have said to me, oh, we still need an alternate facility. Or if our accountant who works, for us part-time isn't available after a disaster, I don't know who I'm going to call. Or, I really need a good sample of an agreement on XYZ. Or if you've got an idea where you think you're going to want to provide a complimentary service to your clients after a disaster, you've got a great facility. So there's offers and needs that I think, my guess is that the needs section is going to fill up more quickly than the offers section. But that's okay. And then if you've got any ideas, like it'd be great in our county if I'm making this up, if the shelter organizations all got together to talk about XYZ, and you want that to happen and you're willing to participate in making it happen, post it on the collaboration ideas. Our commitment is to summarize this very specifically. The food bank needs X, crisis support services needs Y, anybody got it, and send it on out so that there's an opportunity to kind of do a little bit of matchmaking. So I invite you to take advantage of the opportunity to put it out there. It's like the classifieds, the old style classifieds. So that's over lunch, and then in the afternoon, we have a fast-paced, I will say, role play exercise about collaboration, and we've created 3 fictitious organizations and their leadership, and we'll give you an opportunity to play one of those roles and to see how well you can identify collaboration opportunities and then figure out what the next steps would be in taking those collaborations forward. And so it's an opportunity to maybe deal with some of the issues that might be a little more challenging, like the interpersonal, interorganizational things that are actually part of the dynamic of all of the collaboration and don't come up so much when we're talking about programs and systems. And then we'll come back in this room and just for a brief session to reflect on the day. What did we learn? What are some of the next steps? So that's the agenda for the day. Again, quite full, but I think very interesting. And I know this group has a lot of great ideas and is happy to share them. And so I just want to encourage you to speak up and be a part of the conversation. Before I turn the podium over to Carlos, I want to just say 3 quick thank yous, because this is my only podium time. One is to all of you for the hard work that you do every day and the commitment you have to disaster planning and serving the community. And to those of you who I spoke to along the way of planning this event, for your thoughts and suggestions and constructive criticism and just really great ideas. I just really appreciate that. We don't like to do this in a vacuum. This is all for you and about you. Also want to say thank you to Emily and Shally, the other 2 members of the disaster team, and the 3 of us are here all day today to help you in any way, introduce you to folks that you want to meet but don't know yet, or help you with any kind of logistics. And the last thank you is to Mark, who has been our fearless leader and ardent supporter of disaster planning and really strong support to me in my work. And some of you may have heard that Mark is transitioning to a new role. He will be leading the region for the American Red Cross starting in 2 weeks, and his last day with the foundation is tomorrow.
Wow.
And there will be a smooth transition within the foundation of the community health and other work that Mark is doing. And we have a fantastic, continued partnership with the Red Cross through Mark's leadership. And for those of you who know Mark personally, I have a feeling that sometime over the course of today you'll want to just say hello, and we'll see you in your next role. But I did want to acknowledge his strong support of this program and the continued partnership that we know will be there, and the continuity within the foundation of the work that we do in disaster preparedness and in health and public policy, and I could list just a whole long list of things that Mark does. So thank you, Mark, and if I could just say thank you. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce to you our keynote speaker this morning, Carlos Rodriguez. And Carlos is the Executive Director of the FoodBank of Monmouth and Ocean Counties in New Jersey. And prior to Superstorm Sandy, which if you try to say that 3 times fast, have trouble. Prior to the storm, I didn't know where Monmouth and Ocean Counties were. And over the course of those first weeks after the storm, the foundation was exploring opportunities that we might refer to our donors, those who are interested in giving. And I, through a very circuitous route, found myself talking with Carlos in probably right after the first week, and as you all can imagine, that was a very busy time for him. And we had a very long conversation, actually, for someone who was in the throes of disaster response. And I appreciated his thoughtfulness and candor about what was happening, and just his perspective on the role of the food bank, and again, how things were unfolding on the Jersey Shore. And I asked him at that time if I could get back in touch with him once things had settled down a bit, because I knew that his experience was going to be very helpful to nonprofits in our area. Not only the food banks, which I know, that'll be a particularly important experience to share, but I think for all of the nonprofits here, to just hear what it's like to be a responder, particularly when you don't know you're going to be one, and all of a sudden you're a responder in a very challenging situation. So I contacted him again when we were talking about collaboration, and heard a lot of very compelling stories of collaboration and challenges and opportunities, and asked him to share those stories with us today. I think you'll find his examples and perspective very compelling. And again, we're going to take his experience and lessons and immediately, when he's done after some questions, apply them to our own context. So I ask you to, picture what he's saying and then think about if it happened here during something on that scale happened here, which that's what we're planning for. How might those issues unfold for us here? Maybe it'll be different, maybe it'll be the same, maybe there's other things, and just jot a few things down because we're going to have that conversation. So Carlos has a lot of experience in this field. The FoodBank of Monmouth and Ocean Counties does food and building food security, but it also implements other programs that are related to family food and economic security, which he'll share with you. He has a recognized voice in anti-hunger and poverty and has 18 years of experience improving policies and the delivery of services to those in need. He's been with the FoodBank of Monmouth and Ocean Counties just since 2012, but I think he probably feels like he's been there for 10 years, given all the activity that's taken place so far. And prior to that, he was Vice President of the FoodBank for New York City, which is an organization that serves 1 million or so residents of that area. And he's held high-level positions with the Children's Defense Fund of New York and the Community Food Resource Center. He has extensive experience in this area and an educational background in urban policy, nonprofit management, sociology, and nonprofit accounting. So it kind of spans the programmatic and the administration and systems. And served on Feeding America's Strategic Planning Committee and was the treasurer of the eastern region of FoodBank, so has that kind of broader than New Jersey perspective. So I want to just welcome Carlos here today and ask him to share his thoughts with us. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Andrea, and Mark, for the warm welcome and the very generous introduction. And thank you to the San Francisco Foundation, really, for bringing us together here, and to all of you fellow food bankers, emergency food providers, and human service providers, for really taking the time out to really think and about collaboration and how it might come together in the time of a disaster. I have to say, when Andrea reached out to me the second time and asked me to be a part of this conversation, I swore she had the wrong person. I think any one of you at this point, because of this initiative, has more technical disaster training and planning under their belt. I may have a little bit of experience, very recent experience, but you all really do have technical expertise. You've invested time and energy, and the foundation has invested funds to making sure that you do. But when I heard about the topic of conversation, then it really started to relate to me. What was my experience? It really was about relationship building. And I can't agree with Mark more when he says, don't wait till the disaster to do your business card exchange. And in fact, what I had done in a very short time, just 6 months into the job, before the disaster, really was what defined the moments, the success, to the extent you can call something a success during a disaster, in terms of the organization's response. So what I'd like to do today is actually just share with you, and I think if this thing works.
We'll get it, Carlos.
What I like to do with it is just share with you, it's very a pictorial PowerPoint, if you would, with just some guiding points. So it's not, you're not going to have to read anything up there. It's more to help me focus and to really just kind of show you visually what some of the impact was and what we were dealing with. And some of it might invoke some emotion. That's part of the game. That's part of the reality, is you're going to be dealing with those visuals and that reality in a very personal way. Personal in the sense that you may have, you may be affected directly, your staff may be affected, loved ones may be affected, yet you're being called to be a first responder. And I'd like to start by just giving you kind of the lay of the land, giving you some background. What was our environment prior to the storm, and how did that define our approach to relationships and collaborations in a very short period of time. Monmouth and Ocean County is about our service area, with 2 county service area. We have a 1,500 square mile service area with a population of about 1.2 million people. Currently, or before the storm, the food bank is serving about 1 in 10 residents with food distribution and other services. And we're your typical food bank. We provide, or maybe not, well, I think you're typical more or less nowadays. We not only do food distribution through a network of pantries and other emergency food providers, about 260 of those in our case, but we also engage in social service activity, most prominently SNAP outreach and connecting families to other benefits and entitlements. And that, having those relationships with government, as is required, with local food donors, and with funders and individual stakeholders, really does play a difference. I couldn't stress enough how different all of our communities are. So here you have Union Beach, which is pretty much on the northern tip of Monmouth County, hard-working, middle-class type of environment, even though it's at the Jersey Shore. But Monmouth County is very different from Ocean County, and I'll share with you why in a second. This is Seabright. It's a little sliver of a town that shouldn't exist because it should really be just an island. What do we call this? A barrier island to really protect against water. It floods all the time, whether there's a storm or it rains. This is actually about 3 feet worth of sand, and you'll see in a later slide a 25-foot wall of sand. That's what it took to get a very small town, about a couple of miles long, and not even a mile wide, to get all the sand back out from the ocean to the bay, because the bay was actually breached. The ocean breached the land and touched the bay in a couple different spots after the storm. This is part of Seaside Heights. So I picked Seaside Heights for a number of reasons. I found it to be a very curious place when I first started working and exploring the town and the area as a new leader at the food bank. This is where you might have seen the iconic roller coaster in the ocean picture that the media is constantly publicizing. But the truth of the matter is that just a few blocks, probably not even a few blocks, from the roller coaster, you have people walking their dogs who live there year-round. It's not really the beach resort and a beach town. It's a year-round town like everything else. But it's unique in the sense that it's probably one of the, right behind some of those piers, or just west of those piers, probably one of the poorest communities, and where some of those motels that you pay a premium for during June and August, June through August, you actually have, they actually serve as temporary shelters for low-income families throughout the year. Where they go, where they migrate to during the summer is still a curiosity to me. I think they all just find places to go, and it's just part of the fabric of the community there. But it's not so much the iconic roller coaster that has an impact, but the people who live right behind there, the service folks who fix all those machines year-round. And I was just there for the first time with my 2 young boys. I have a now 4 and a 6-year-old this past summer. And I remember the young lady who let him ride the log flume over and over again, my then 3-year-old, because he was just having a great time. It was his first little roller coaster. And she had a young child herself, so that's probably why she let him ride over and over. I keep thinking about how is she providing for her child now that this job is no longer there. That was her job. And you have a lot of seasonal work that way that impact them. So think about all the different rides that you imagine and what that actually does in terms of the people that you're going to be responding to. Manahawkin is probably the southern tip of Ocean County, closer to that. It's about 2 hours from the very tip of Monmouth County, northern tip, to the very southern tip of Ocean County. If you follow the parkway straight down, it'll probably take about 90 minutes to 2 hours. So this is Manahawkin on our southernmost things, and the weather was cruel to us because not only were we dealing with the impact of the storm, Sandy, but we also had a couple snowstorms just to deal with that, and then also complications like, so what happens to mold when it freezes? never really had to deal with that. So a lot of folks were asking what that would mean in terms of remediations, and those very real practical challenges, which you're not going to learn from. We'll learn some here, but I doubt you may or may not be able to apply them because every disaster is going to bring a completely different set of challenges. So just to sum up the background, is this Southern Ocean County here. We have two counties, right? Very different. One is more affluent than the other. One draws from the New York City metro region. It's really both very suburban community with some urban elements and some rural elements. And one is affluent with a lot of commuters to New York in the finance industry and investment industry. And the other is, and we're wedged between New York up north and northern New Jersey, which has pockets of affluence, of course. South of Ocean County is Atlantic City, which is a very big urban area, very well recognized. And just west of that is the Philly metro area and Trenton. So we have this unique kind of wedged reality between all these different communities, or different big metro areas, I should say. And Ocean County really is no one here from Ocean County, right? The psychology really is kind of that of a stepchild or the middle child, if you would. It's poor by nature, and it has this identity attached with it as well. And so I wish when we were named 30 years ago or so, that we would have been the FoodBank of Ocean in Monmouth County, because it would have made relationship building a little easier. And perhaps we should have put our facility in Ocean versus Monmouth County, because those little things do matter. New Jersey is the land of home rule. And I say that because it's very environmentally, it's important to know your environment in that sense, because you're going to approach relationships and collaborations in a very unique way if you know this stuff. And so what does that mean, the land of home rules? Well, it's two counties, it's 87 different municipalities, and every mayor thinks they're Bloomberg. Or your San Francisco mayor, also very popular and very prominent. And so they demand that kind of attention, whether you're serving 5 people or 5,000 people or 50,000 people. And the expertise in that kind of local reality varies. So you have folks that are, well seasoned, with some policy background. You have folks who are in Office of Emergency Management, might just be political appointees. And every town is completely different. I can be across the street from you, but it's a different town with a different set of building codes and health, maybe some health different requirements and so on. And so it's important to know what your environment is, because your approach for the same ask is going to be very different. It is very different for us when we go to a town in Ocean County versus Monmouth County. It's very different if I'm in Ocean County and I'm speaking with someone in Southern Ocean County versus Northern Ocean County, and the shore area versus to the west of the Garden State Parkway, which is kind of like that divider, imaginary divider. So all of these things context plays a very important role to how you approach your relationship. And I like to share that with you, because the only way I learned that in such a short period of time is because I had my own hang-ups about being the guy from New York, right? I had been living in New Jersey for a while, but I was a very new executive director, and I was just getting to, and I was a bit of a curiosity. So here we got a guy from New York. Oh, he thinks he knows everything. Wait, he was born and raised in the Bronx too? Well, now he's really a curiosity. At the Jersey Shore, if you're from the northern part of New Jersey, which is just right over that Raritan Bridge on the Garden State Parkway, you're referred to as a Benny. One of the local historians told me. I don't know if that refers to Bergen County, New York, or whatever. So, in short, I was the curiosity Benny from the Bronx that everyone wanted to get to know as soon as I joined in February of 2012. And that's okay, because I was just as curious about the community that I will now be serving. So I leveraged that in terms of getting out there and getting to meet as many people as possible. And I made my first, so when the storm hit, I just finished my second round of 90-day tours. My first 90 days was completely external. I did about 60 visits in 30 days with stakeholders, community partners, funders, and just listened. Just absolutely listen. Listen to their concerns, try to address their concern, and then show that I was that we were very much partners and partners that wanted to be relevant to their needs. And that exchange of business cards early really was the beginning of establishing relationships. In some cases where they didn't exist, and in other cases where they should have existed, but or should have been stronger, but maybe they weren't as nurtured the way they could have been, because you have different organizational focus at different times. That's part of the backdrop. So me being new, that's definitely one of the key points, and it played to the reality of our organization's role. But I think it was leveraged the right way by coincidence, by luck. It just happened to be what my organization called me to do as a new leader. And it was part of the way I would want to introduce myself into a new community anyway. So those two things aligned for reasons none other than just happened to be that way. And that's the way I kind of called the approach. The other important backdrop is this was actually the second storm, that significant storm that we were dealing with. The organization had just increased its distribution by about 84% since 2005. So we went from serving a few million pounds of food to just about 6 million pounds of food, mostly because of the recession, or the economic storm as we were calling it. So we were just trying to figure out reality post that recession, trying to figure out, all right, how do we absorb this growth over the long term? Because the organization was just kind of grappling with that. And then the other significant aspect is that we also launched and had just released, made public, our new strategic plan. It's from 2012 to from 2011 to 2016. So it's our 5-year plan. And I had just, as I was coming in, the plan was being finalized, and so I had a chance to weigh in on some of that stuff and learn in terms of all the research that had gone into of what was going on within the space and what the organization saw at its role. One of the key elements of that plan was to strengthen our community partnerships. So it really easily, when I came in, all right, I'm hitting the road. Got to use Prius, and I put it to work, and put a lot of miles into it, over 30,000 in 1 year. But that was part, again, of the organizational design that I walked into that was right for my organization at the time. All the other nuances about the personalities of the towns and the different counties is something that I had to explore and kind of had to navigate through. And then last but not least, disaster planning and assets. Like I said, you all are much better planned technically and probably have more things established than we did. The one thing that I did and the organization did was we put in a generator. Started in February, so by that first June, I was working through the first budget process. The conversation came up, hey, we've been talking about putting a generator. That's a big ticket item for a warehouse facility. It's about 35,000 square feet, with a good 8,000 square feet of freezer and cooler. So all my food bankers know what that means. That means a lot of power and a lot of expense. I had just, before I even had being the ED of the Jersey Shore Food Bank, before that was even a twinkle in my eye, I was actually evacuated while vacationing in Cape May, which is south of the Jersey Shore, and so that was fresh in my mind. And we also had an earthquake over down there as well. Had that little earthquake, so I saw both things. I don't know if that was a sign or whatever, but it was fresh on my mind. I said, yeah, we kind of got lucky with Irene. And so when the conversation came up, I said, we have money in the bank. We had done, and the board had done its due diligence, and the team had done its diligence, putting money aside. I said, it'd be great to be able to, do the naming thing and get someone to fund the 6-figure piece. But I'm a little concerned that we're talking about this in May, and hurricane season is right around the corner, and we don't have a lot of things. I had also lived through 9/11, and was worked in the community during 9/11, and saw what it took to manage some of those relationships, and our offices were also displaced. So I had all these things kind of rattling in my head. I said, we're going to propose putting in a generator. The board immediately embraced it, said it makes sense. Well, we were the only food bank in all of New Jersey who actually had generators, had a generator in place. And surprisingly enough, there aren't that many food banks that have generators in coastal areas. It's an expensive item, so I get it. The results of that planning and having that asset is we were able to protect our food. We were able to, literally before the winds died down, we were on the phones. We had a skeleton crew the very next morning as soon as the governor said the parkway is open. I tested it. I drove an hour down. I live an hour away. And then folks came from different parts of different communities, and we met with the skeleton crew, and we just started talking shop. And we wouldn't have been able to do that if we hadn't had at least that part of an investment in terms of strength. The other thing that we did, the only plan that we did have, because we're all required to have a plan, right, Larry? All required to have a plan. We did have the contact information, which we had used during the storms, and the call tree, and using text messages, and we did have that in place where we were able to communicate to staff with various forms. So we called everyone to kind of come in. Because we did that, we were able to start building collaborations and start building what went from anxiety to what I call now the strategic approach, a very relevant response to Sandy. And I say that half jokingly because during that first hour drive, my main concern was how in the world are we going to be relevant, and how in the world are we going to respond with being so new and the organization still being relatively going through its kind of young adulthood, if you would, in terms of formalizing itself. Great team, well-meaning, but we still needed to kind of define ourselves and build relationships. Because we did that, and because we had a strategic plan in place that called us, gave us a framework, one of the first things that we did was pick up our phones. We hadn't upgraded our phones, which is a good thing, so we had copper lines that still worked. Disaster planning, make sure you have copper line backup, because the internet was down. And the cell phones weren't working, because guess what? We didn't have power for about 2 weeks. So the cell towers run on power. And so now there's talk about putting generators at certain cell sites. Text messaging worked, Facebook worked, web didn't work because our internet was down. But the copper lines worked. So I'm not getting rid of the copper lines. I'll upgrade my phone system. I'm not getting rid of the copper lines. So what we were able to do is immediately start calling our 260 emergency food providers and partners throughout the Jersey Shore. And before they even were able to retrieve, or as they were beginning to retrieve their messages, because you kind of come up from a daze, and you can imagine as a local provider, it's your neighborhood, it's your community, it's your church that might have been impacted. We left messages. Hey, we're here. We're open. Tell us what you see. Tell us what you need. Simple message. And so people immediately knew we were told afterwards one of the first voicemails they were able to retrieve were the food banks, saying we're here, we're ready, and we want to be able to respond. What really started out as anxiety really turned out to be a good strategy, and I confess to that now. We decided to service. Our approach was very service-oriented. Again, it kind of ties into our strategic plan a little bit. It was focused on. It was a focus with food, but it was pretty much not the only thing that we were bringing to the table. We have a network, and that to us was the biggest strategy. Because we were open, because we had a facility, we became a local bridge builder, not only for donors, for corporations and community partners, but also for the media. We played a very important role in being able to tell the story, not just for us. Yes, it's very self-serving, of course. You're out there, your name is out there, you're relevant, and you're being shown as responsive. But we were able to direct our media to some of the hardest hit areas, and we were able to connect our partners with some stories and kind of leverage and build relationships that way. It's not just about us. We're all going to be in this together for a long time. None of us knew how long back then. And we help facilitate for others who may not even have the media expertise that we fortunately do, and as FoodBanks, I think most of us do. We were able to do that. So that's another way of kind of leveraging relationships. Share your resources. Share the moment in the spotlight. And we were able to think very quickly beyond the crisis. Or I immediately imagined, well, what are we going to be doing in a couple of weeks? So I don't know who planned the storm right before Thanksgiving. I mean, we're a food bank for crying out loud. Never mind, it wasn't in my one-year plan. But I'm thinking it's November 1st for all intents and purposes. If I didn't have that generator, 10,000 turkeys would have been priceless at this point. You can't raise turkeys that fast, especially 10,000 of them. So what am I doing immediately, just from November to the end of December, and who do I need to call? All my food partners, who am I going to be relying on? So we started making all these calls and just facilitating and building bridges to help meet the need of everyone who wants to respond. It's not just your partners, it's not just your clients, but how are you managing your corporate relationships and your corporations as well? We accommodated. Sometimes there was really no shelf to put some of that donation in, but guess what? So-and-so corporation also needed to be relevant and to respond. So we needed to make some space for them. And then maybe it just went out to a local food bank if it's allowable, and we shared some of that product with them. And we expect the favorable return when we need some food in the future. Because the interesting thing about a disaster is there's a lot of resources that become immediately available. A lot of resources that become food and some funds. And you have to manage all of those. And sometimes the best way to manage them is to say no. We said no. We had to say no to clothing. Everybody was sending clothing. I don't want clothing here. That's, pest control. Food. It doesn't mix. So we said no. We were one of the first ones to say no. The next moment we hear the governor say no. Don't send any more. We don't need that. I mean, folks are sending like used sneakers too, which doesn't really work. But sometimes you have to say no. Said no to funding. If you really wanted to restrict funding in a certain way where I know I couldn't put it to work, I don't need that liability. Turn on the news and you'll see. So managing these collaborations and these relationships in a way that's honest and really identifies your need, I think is very important. And then sharing the wealth. Sometimes I knew of a partner that might have been better suited. I routed donors, food, funds, volunteers, media, to folks that I had identified as partners, whether I met them during my first 90 days of business card exchanges, or whether I met them as part of running around. Andrea and you had a great conversation because I spent a lot of time in my car going out and talking to folks while I had my team doing a lot of the work. And with an hour commute, I think we spent an hour because of that. So you just have to use every single moment. And that's the way that I think relationships became stronger early on, by sharing, by collaborating, by being honest with each other and having a good perspective that was grounded in that listening tour that I made and continue to make as we started getting those calls back. So I think if you're and we had a framework. So very quickly after the storm, we were trying to figure out, well, what are some of the operating realities that we're going to have, and how are we going to start transitioning? It's not even Thanksgiving yet, and I'm thinking what's going to happen in January, and what's going to be needed, and how am I going to start, as a lot of checks started coming in, money is a liability. I mean, money is a liability. You hear the stories now, well, where's the money going? Not knowing that it's not relief, it's meant for long term, and if you haven't figured out what your flood zone is going to be, guess what? Can't give you any money because you don't really know how to spend it yet. So this is a long term. I said very early on to partners and collaborators and to the team, to my team, the fundraising is a sprint, the work is a marathon. So yes, you have to get as many resources as possible, but don't pigeonhole yourself in all of it being just about relief. Make sure that they extend into other areas of your organization. So we talked a little bit about some of those operating realities. I mean, no gas, so where am I fueling my trucks? I got a generator that I think about diesel refueling, and we splurged on a 3-day run tank, so we had enough diesel fuel for 3 days. We thought we were splurging. We didn't have power in our area in some places for weeks. So we quickly had to figure out how to leverage relationships to get refueling done for our trucks, the local state troopers, so they can let us run up and down the parkway with our trucks, which normally you can't do after a certain point. And so a lot of those were new relationships. Because we had presence in our community, they were very easily brokered, and not necessarily by me. I can have my team call them, and they can do anything. The other dynamic is, and how do you manage relationships in local communities where you may not be serving, but that your staff might be living there? Because guess what? There was curfews everywhere, 87 curfews, potentially. I don't think all of them had a curfew. So I can come to work and we could be fine, but I don't want my staff getting pulled over and arrested because they're not at home by 7 o'clock because it's dark at that point. So these are very different realities that we had to manage and relationships that we had to broker throughout that. So some, by the numbers, so just to give you a size of the scale that we did, we provided about 1 million meals, that's well over 1 million pounds in the first year. Budgeted that fiscal year for about $50,000 in capacity grants that we were challenging ourselves to raise. Well, we distributed already, checks have been mailed into the tune of $225,000. Not a big food bank, we're about $5 million operating food bank. But we were able to immediately say, no, this is what we need. We lost about 8 or 9 pantries. We're going to help them rebuild to give us funds to help us do that. We have to build the capacity of others because they're now absorbing more clients. And so this is stuff that they told me. So we immediately knew, and we had a mechanism in place in terms of applications had already gone out for the 50,000 we thought we were going to get. We adapted it. So we got lucky that way. We also checked our egos at the door. And one of the benefits of that was that we were able to focus, again, on some of those long-term things that we're going to have to be working on. So one good example of that, or a couple of good examples on that is, so very early on, I was very hung up, if you would, on making sure we're providing to the first responders, right? Because that's good visibility and it's important work and we had the resources to do it. And to the shelters, actually, was the other one. Some of the Red Cross shelters. Well, you know, after I think it's Greater Baptist groups comes in with their big mobile kitchens, it's time for me to check out. I had a little bit of, you know, let go pain, if you would. And I had to really stop, and we really had to stop somewhere and say, wait, that's not our role. It's time for us to move on. Let's not get stuck in this aspect of the response. And so we chatted with our partners in both areas, and we identified someone else with a first responder that was better able of doing that, and we were able to supply their food, which was great because we had a lot of food. So again, we were able to check our ego at the door. That's not what we need to do, and we need to adapt because we need to talk longer. The other thing that we did relevant to this next bullet point is United Way had been in conversation, one of our local United Ways had been in conversation with us about taking over the local VITA program. I ran one of the largest VITA programs while I was in New York and was very interested in that opportunity. The IRS had already found me, which is not normally something that's exciting.
What's VITA?
VITA is the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, so free taxes. So we layered that, and we have been planning to layer that as part of our SNAP outreach. You're doing one kind of outreach. Believe it or not, SNAP outreach is more difficult than filling out your taxes. I didn't say that. One of the former commissioners told me that from the IRS. And so the United Way and us had a conversation. I said, you know, we really can't do this before the storm. We said, we really can't do this now. We don't have the resources or the bandwidth. Let's do it for 2014. Well, after the storm, it became very relevant that these resources were going to be needed, and after a quick assessment, we put a free tax program together in about a month, and were able to get significant funding to do so, because some of the partners that were looking how to spend their money were folks that I knew from my previous roles, and I convinced them, look, these numbers are very clear. We need this type of, if you needed it before, you're going to have that many more folks that need it. What did that do? I reached out to my local United Way partner and said, and had the CEO, are you going to be able to do the VITA? Can we partner? He was like, I can't do the VITA and lead one of the recovery teams. You can have it. I'll give you all my contacts, all the funders, all the volunteers, and everything else. So again, because we were able to step back and say, what are we really working towards in the long term? We were able to really accelerate a partnership and provide relief to one of our partners that really needed to kind of manage the space, manage their time a little bit more strategically. It was more important for them not to be in a direct service business, but doing this type of, doing this kind of collaborative long-term restructuring work. That made sense. Other things regarding the long-term recovery process and collaboration, I think I hit on a lot of them. The pre-disaster investments that we made helped us to reach out to national and state partners. We had already, and I had already set myself up in terms of being a part of the Human Services Advisory Council. It's just a group of all the primary human service folk in both counties, and it's led by the county. So I made sure that our organization was a member and that I sat in all those meetings, even when they were talking about things that I had no clue about and my organization was never going to do. But I was building rapport. That rapport was leveraged during the disasters. Sometimes you got to just do your time in some of these meetings and be the leader at some of these meetings. And it's important, and you never know why until it happens. How did it evolve? Again, we were constantly checking for shifting capacities for ourselves and looking at available assets and how we were going to be able to play them out over the long term. Local governments, I spoke a lot about local governments early on and how we have different municipalities with very different relationships and capacities. Leadership. So you think you know a leader and you think you know an organization and you may have inked the perfect MOU, but guess what? Everything changes during a disaster for reasons outside of your partner or your collaborator's control, or because it affects leadership in one way or another. And so you have to evaluate, well, who's your strong partner, and is that partnership now an asset or is it a liability? And how do I manage that in a respectful way? And so it's again, being honest with yourself and being honest in terms of what you're trying to produce for your community. And we did that. And then looking ahead, one of the things that's going to happen after the long term, and I can't imagine everyone in this room not being a part of it, is these long-term recovery groups that you may already have established here. We only had, by the way, just one VOAD, very new VOAD, a volunteer organization assisting time disasters. So we only had one of them in our 2 counties. Because we never had it. Had a great state VOAD, we just didn't have any. Could you believe that? It was the Jersey Shore. Shore being the key word there. And so very quickly I had to get in contact, and I realized, and even in the one that we did have a VOAD, guess what? The point person there who I happened to have a good relationship with, his brother had passed away, so he wasn't around. I couldn't get hold of anyone. I wasn't directly plugged in. My organization wasn't directly plugged in. I knew who to call, couldn't reach them. So what's your backup plan? Who's your backup contact? What about you? Who's your backup contact? One of the things I remember, some of my key folks, they were fine, they weren't affected, but they had a 3-foot wide tree sitting in front of their driveway that they couldn't get cut down. They couldn't get out. Couldn't come to work. Complete access could, and weren't otherwise affected, but they were inaccessible. So who's your backup? What's your backup plan in terms of staffing? And who's your backup plan, and how do you have relationships outside of the region? We're very fortunate to be a part as a food bank of a network of food banks and part of Feeding America. We were able to call on different food banks to come in and send us at least 2 workers for a week so that my staff can recharge, because you really don't want to be doing warehousing work on 12-hour shifts, and your driver is only legally allowed to drive for 8 hours. And so what's your backup plan? Do you have that set up? You don't need to know the who, but do you have good relationships within your state, within your region? And if not, maybe it's time to start really building some, because everything else aside during the disaster, you're not going to have all the resources and all the answers to provide the solutions that your community is going to ask you for. So our next steps for us is to really identify the gaps and build relationships where we know things might have been falling through the cracks, or things have come up, the timeliness of the response has really taken a little longer. To continue to break down barriers. So they are, if I had a local elected official that was giving me a hard time before, guess what? They're still giving me a hard time. So now I have maybe 20 friends that are really going to come with me and make a case to help that distribution. I overheard at my table, about one such incident, not letting a local distribution kind of happen. And so that's very relevant. Identify those kind of problem areas and figure out what pressure points you can leverage, because you might have new friends after this is all over, or as you're going through this. The thing that I came to appreciate is that part of what we were doing, there we go. Part of what we were doing and continue to need to do is kind of strengthen our presence. So we're a well-known brand, but we need to be better known, and we need to be known for what we really bring to the table. Can anyone imagine what FoodBank's strongest asset actually is? It's not food. It's not food. It's our community partnerships. It's our community partnerships. Food is a means to a greater end. What is that end? Is being able to deliver services to direct communities because of the collaborations you already have in place. Are those collaborations strong enough? Do we need, or is every organization that I'm partnering with in that community have a backup? And if not, what am I doing about it? So again, make sure that my strength is present. And it's not just about food. Food is, takes care of the crisis of not being able to feed your family, but it's a problem that's been with us for well over 30 years. It's a chronic problem. So what are we doing in terms of putting solutions on the place? The SNAP outreach that I mentioned, the tax program that we embarked on. It's all service delivery mechanisms. So it's whether it's that service that we're simplifying, we're garnering the expertise and the knowledge to do so, and then we're working with local partners to deliver it. Substitute food for X, health benefits or food stamps or taxes. That's our strength. So really take a moment to really appreciate and know what your strengths are, and then leverage it. Find out where the gaps really are. Does everyone know what your assets really are so that they can be speaking to you in a way? And is your board aligned? You know, at the end of the day, what we want to have is impact. We want to have collaborations. We want to have relationships that really have impact, that has scalability to the extent that you need it. And I think it was very grounding for me just a few weeks ago to be able to receive this note from Wilma. Wilma is from Brick, so it's just a little north of Manahawk in the picture with the snow on it. And she wrote to thank us for the food that we delivered to senior citizens through our mobile pantry. She said, "It was good of your organization to help in the wake of Sandy, but you keep us fed all year long. You've been the ones that keep many of us from hunger." We started reaching out because of, we expanded our services through a mobile pantry, but at the end of the day, what she saw was consistency. The fact that we were able to do what we did throughout the storm has the impact to her and hopefully many more than 127,000 other people. It defined for us how we approach relationships, how we honored those relationships, how we build collaborations really on the fly for us, because we didn't have the opportunity to do what you all have embarked on. And at the end of the day, this is the kind of impact that you want to have. It doesn't matter how many millions of this and how many hundreds of thousands of that. Can you tell that one story? And can your partner tell that one story with you? And if the answer is yes, then you're very well prepared. And if there's some weaknesses there, but there's plenty of time to work on that as well for the rest of the day. Thank you.
We have time for, we are already behind. We started a little bit late, but I don't want to cut short the conversation with Carlos and the discussion. So we have time for 2 questions. And if you can keep the question itself brief, that'll give Carlos time to respond. GL?
Do you require your pantry partners to have a disaster plan?
No. And I don't know if they have the capacity to do that, so why don't I plan with them? I started very quickly, was invited by the New Jersey Food Council immediately after to do after-action planning. And one of the things that they're working on is planning for the local supermarkets. And it just gave me the perfect framework. That's what I am. I'm the local association or the local food shop working, and I should be planning for them. I should be sending out flood zone advisories to the pantry that's in that flood zone or in the path of the storm. So yeah, there should be some type of plan that extends to them. I don't know that I would put it on their shoulder because the capacity is very different.
Other questions? Joanne?
What does SNAP mean? And it was really interesting when you said that MOUs or memorandums of understanding you had before didn't necessarily work. Could you just say a little bit more about that?
Well, we didn't have MOUs in many cases because we didn't have this type of formal arrangements in many places. So what we did have was this personal relationship that I was forced because of being new, because of what my plan called us for. So we started talking about ways to collaborate, but we didn't have necessarily MOUs. We have contracts with all of our food distribution partners, right? And MOUs for different project areas, but nothing related to disasters.
You didn't have an MOU with like the local...
I'm telling you, you guys are all much more prepared than I ever would have imagined needing to be. And I knew I needed all these things, and so they were on the list, but they weren't anything that I accomplished in 6 months, and the organization had to focus on. SNAP is food stamps. So new name of food stamps.
Barbara?
Hi, this isn't actually a question. It's kind of a thank you and also Red Cross related. My mother and family and very close friends live in Long Beach, New York. And Long Beach, New York looked like those pictures. And I went back to help. And one of the things you didn't mention is that the sand and the water, which completely covered Long Beach, were contaminated. And so people living there couldn't move back into their homes until that stuff was taken out of the houses, which is where they wound up. And just one very quick anecdote. when I went back there, we had to stay in my mother's house for it to be repaired so that she could move back in. There was no heat. It was freezing cold. And you forget about certain things when you're in the midst of this craziness. We were in her house for 10 hours, wearing 3 coats, and things wrapped around our heads, freezing, as people were coming and trying to get the sand and water out. About hour 6, a Red Cross truck came down the street, and we had forgotten to bring food. I mean, we just weren't thinking about it. Well, of course, we had no food, we had nothing. And we went outside, and they were delivering meals just up and down the street. And I will never forget sitting in my mother's house with her crying, and my mother's not an emotional person, saying she never thought that she would be eating or needing a meal from the Red Cross in her lifetime. And, you know, one of the things we tell people all the time, when a disaster hits, or even a daily disaster, you never know if it's going to be you or a neighbor or somebody you love. So I want to thank you for all the work you do, and it's a pleasure being able to collaborate with one another, especially when you're on the other side of the desk, which I also was in the FEMA recovery centers, and seeing all those people do what we do during a disaster. And it's very humbling being on the other side, and I can't tell you how many thank yous I gave when I was back east. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'll let John Miller know, who's a friend and the CEO of that Red Cross on Long Island.
So please join me in thanking Carlos again. So we're going to have a more abbreviated discussion at the table, but what I want to do is make sure that everyone who's on this side, kind of sprinkled in the tables, finds a seat or makes a new table. Why don't we make a new table? Who has a seat next to them? Just quickly show of hands who has a seat next to them. I think we've got enough. So for those folks over here, and at the table, please, facilitators, could you just raise your hands for 1 second? Mike, you're at the back table? Okay. Ashley, there's a seat up here. Liz, there's a seat over there if you wouldn't mind. Looks like there's a seat maybe at that table.
We could be on your emergency. My son is also very smart. That's right. So I'm really interested because I
We don't have the 87 consistency.